Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Your Ear. It's the Earth911 podcast, and I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. Today, we are really pleased to be joined by author and sustainability expert Kevin Wilhelm. Kevin is the CEO of Sustainable Business Consulting in Seattle. He's also a professor at the University of Washington and starting this fall at Harvard, teaching sustainability to business executives and to students who want to participate in a more sustainable future. Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, hey, we wanted you to come on and talk about your new book, How to Talk to the Other Side, Finding Common Ground in the Time of Coronavirus, Recession, and Climate Change. It's a book that you and Natalie Hoffman, Petra Barbrew, and a couple of other folks, Ruth Lee and Katie Seacrest, put together. As the pandemic came on, you released it on Amazon. It's available as a Kindle reading option. So if you're a subscriber to the Kindle reading program, you can get it there for free. But it's a fantastic book about starting the conversation between the us and them that you perceive in the world, if I might put it that way. So tell us, first off, why was this the right time to talk about talking to the other side?
Well, I think one of the things that's really been out there is that we've seen that this really deterioration of our ability to have civil discourse, even within our families. I like to say the difficult Thanksgiving arguments are now coming into the fold in all of our lives. And over the last 10 years, we've really seen where politics, which used to be just a very small portion of our lives, has now become an identifier, a kind of stand-in to represent all of one person's values. And I really thought that this was, something that needed to be addressed. And then as we headed into the pandemic, I myself and Natalie, we were both extremely worried that, and we're seeing it now in real time, where things like wearing masks and whether you open a restaurant or not, or how do you show up at a protest, are becoming politicized. And, whether somebody is, a Democrat or Republican, or they believe in climate change or not, or they think that, you should be wearing a mask or not, now is all becoming politicized, and people have become incredibly tribal into an us versus them mentality. And I just felt like there needed to be a resource, there needed to be a guidebook, there needed to be a path forward that was positive, that could show people how can we get back to finding common ground, how can we find win-win solutions where, it's not an either or of, you care about the economy or you care about public health, but how can you, make sure you're meeting your public health concerns in a way that helps protect and grow the economy. And I just felt like it was the right time. It was the right book that needed to be out there, and people needed some positivity and some solutions.
So, completely agree. And I've had some interesting conversations recently with people in the news about why they spoke up at certain times about things. And it's because identity politics made anything they said a brickbat. Something that could be used against the other side when they don't intend to take sides. They simply they want to make a statement about fact. Starting the conversation, you recommend listening. And the question I have for you is, how do you get somebody to listen or decide that they need to listen before they start telling their story? That seems to me the real challenge here is, how do I get somebody on another side of an issue rather than all issues? Because I don't believe we're all on other sides of all issues. How do I get that conversation going?
It really comes back to kind of basic 101, just conversation. I feel like whenever I bring up an issue, whether it's, climate change in the environment or business, people are they're amped. They want to tell their story and their side so hard, and they want to convince you that they're right. And I think on both sides of the aisle, both sides of, when I say talking to the other side, everyone is trying to figure out how to convince the other side that they should listen to them and they should be right. If you just flip the script and say, okay, let me listen to the other side and hear what they have to say. And then if I do that in a respectful way, maybe they'll do the same for me. And, I liken it to two things in the world. Like when you were single and you showed up at a party and you saw that guy or gal that you were interested in, you didn't walk right up to him and say, like, this is who I am and this is why you should love me and this is, everything about me and why I'm the best person. You started by, you cuddled up next to them, you listened to what they were talking about, you find where do you share common interests, where you could build some rapport, have some conversation, and then you started to have, more detailed conversation. And, I break the book up into 3 different sections, and Natalie and I did this together where, the first part is start by beginning where you can find common ground. Instead of, when you get to somebody and you feel like I need to convince them that they're right or wrong on climate change or the economy or COVID or whatever, have a conversation about sports, their hobbies, their interests, where they're from, where they like to travel, what do they like to do when the COVID restrictions are lifted. How's it been in their lives, at home? Because there's so much commonality right now in terms of everyone's shared experience, that by building that rapport first, then it allows you to hear what's going on. And the second part about listening is that so often the person on the other side who shares a different opinion, they don't feel like they've been listened to. Certainly we saw this in the election of 2016 on both sides. People that voted for, whether they voted for Trump or the Clinton, they felt like they weren't being listened to by the other side. And so that's why they might have voted against their social or economic self-interest, just because they wanted to be heard. They wanted someone to represent them. And so I feel like by giving people the opportunity to be heard and listened to and empathized with and understanding their personal story, once you do that, you kind of can peel back the layers and you find that you have something. And that's what the whole second part of the book is about, is once you kind of peel back that layer of the onion, where the common ground and the win-win solutions exist. And they're plentiful, but you have to get to that stage.
So you use a couple of terms that I just want to share with folks. One is allyship, this idea that you can build some form of common ground by doing the kinds of sharing you're talking about. And you also are very careful to distinguish between setting up common goals, or the ends to which you might agree, like we value nature, versus the means of getting there, which is usually where people disagree, because they may have a very different feeling about the role of government or the role of business or the role of the police. And I think one of your key ideas was to ask the other side about their relationship with nature, rather than do you support the environment or something like that? How do they interact with it? Because as you point out, rural people are using a lot of technology, for instance, to breed cattle. Using the cattle don't have any form of sex now. They are simply inseminated with a database-driven set of genetics. And on the other hand, in the urban communities, you've got very dense communities that are using policy and advanced technology to try to manage themselves better, and finding that you both may be using technology or both may be using science in different ways, but that you're using it to get toward an environmental goal is a great binding tool. So when you talk about allyship, and you particularly try to address that urban-rural difference, which seems to be one of the major characteristics of the political divisions in the country, how do you get somebody to say, yeah, I'm for that too?
Yeah, I think that, as you mentioned, finding that shared aspiration and what you can agree on is a key step. And it's actually quite simple. If you think about it right now, whether it's, the reopening of the economy versus, public health, if instead of saying, should we reopen the economy or should we stay locked down, if you say, how can we reopen the economy in a way where we can preserve your job and make sure that your family doesn't get sick and my family doesn't get sick? Mm-hmm. Then people go, yeah, let's talk about that. If it's, and that's the same thing, I think, with the Black Lives Matter movement that we're seeing, when you talk about the urban-rural divide, if it's, someone saying, well, and I know this because I'm from rural Ohio originally, in a town that was predominantly homogeneous white. When people would say, Black Lives Matter, people say, well, all lives matter. And you can say, yeah, I agree. As opposed to, no, we need to really, talk about this first. But by agreeing and then saying, okay, so we agree all lives matter. Now let's bring it back to, what's happening to our African-American brothers and sisters in the community. and what they're feeling against, and to then explain to them what it might be like, and when you can share something. And, I use the experience of being pulled over as a teen a couple times in high school, and how just threatening that felt to, be worried about every time you saw a police car. And I say, now, when I talk to some of my African-American friends, they've been pulled over like 18 times for no reason in the last, 5-10 years. And they'll say, what, really? Oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, and this is probably what it feels like. But instead of telling them, I try and, the thing with allyship is I try and get them to find where they might have been uncomfortable. And so, like with the rural urban divide, it's like, you ask someone, have you ever walked into a room where you felt uncomfortable? What was it? And everyone's personal experience is different. It might be, they might have been a farmer who's now walking into a room with a bunch of people in suits, or it might be the people who are in suits that are walking in a room with a bunch of farmers. It might be someone who's walking in a room with people of a different skin pigmentation they've never been in, or a different sexual orientation. And they will all have their own personal experience as to where they felt uncomfortable. And instead of trying to convince them, you listen to them, you find out what it felt like. Why did it feel uncomfortable? What did they do about it? What could have been different? Then you can open up the conversation into where you're trying to steer it. But so often people are just looking for the aha, let me tell you now, instead of just truly listening. And, I use the example of, coming back from, I consider myself an incredible ally, but I also know I have incredible biases. And I remember very distinctly being in a room of, like, say, progressives in Seattle, and then going to a room of very conservative, say, Trump supporters outside of Seattle, and the difference in what they're talking about and how they're talking about things, and listening, but then realizing we all had the shared aspirations. Everybody wanted to have their kids to have a healthy, safety environment. Everyone wanted, no one wanted to get COVID. No one wanted to die from it. Everyone wanted to keep their job, and once you start at that point, then it allows the conversation to happen.
That this is the problem with the difference between lived experience and broad-based fact, right? We may have a unique experience, but it's within a distribution of experiences that are described by statistics. And you also point out that once you get to that basic allyship where we say, yeah, we both value this outcome, but we don't necessarily agree how to get there, you can start to pick apart the how we are getting there now. An example you use is the difference between, or when you're talking about renewable energy, the subsidies that are paid to the fossil fuel industry versus the subsidies paid to renewables. And the difference is fossil fuels get about $2,000 a year in subsidies. Renewable energies get $21,000. Once you get to that allyship where you can say, well, all right, let's step back and look at the bigger picture together. Do you find that the data really makes a difference in the conversation?
I do. However, I think it's one of the things that I like to caution people about. We've seen this with environmental issues and climate, is that data does not help change people's opinion. People form their opinions based on emotion. They vote on emotion. They don't vote on data. And so while, you can have the conversation about, are subsidies good or bad, and you show them the data, and I use the example in the kind of business and environmental chapter where, very, very often we've seen this like either or mentality about, can you invest to maximize shareholders' profits? Or do you need to sacrifice to, do better for society and the planet? And I say you can do both, and you have to show them the path of how to do it. And when you show them the data, they still have a guttural, emotional, I just don't trust that. And so,
and it conflicts with their lived experience.
Yeah, and so you have to come to an anecdote. And so, the example that I use with renewable energy is that, we find the family farmer who doesn't want to be told what to do by the government or by these, leftist environmentalists or Democrats, because they just want to farm. They want to be left alone. And they start talking to them and say, well, what's your life been like? We're getting killed by commodity prices. We're getting killed by droughts. We're getting killed by Chinese tariffs. And then you throw the COVID on us and we're barely able to survive. And then you come at them and say, well, is there a way that we could, mitigate that risk and give you a baseline income? And they go, oh, I love that. And then you show them that, by putting a wind turbine or some solar on their property, yes, they have to give up just a very small 1%, maybe even less than that fraction of their acreage to make that happen. But all of a sudden, the financial anxiety is gone. And then before you know it, they become your biggest allies and start going around telling their other farmer friends, like, hey, you know what? We put turbines up. You should too. I don't care if you believe in climate change, who you vote for, or whatever. This helps me, provide, $7,500 per turbine that helps me, baseline my income, allows me to invest in my farm technology, paying my workers more, new irrigation techniques, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But you have to first hear where their anxiety and their point is before you can come up with a solution. So data won't do it alone. You kind of have to have the shared experience, but also the understanding how it affects them personally.
So, and what I hear you saying, and I just want to check it, is economic opportunity, the opportunity to make a buck, changes people's perspective because that's one of our most emotional levers. So if, for instance, we can get somebody who is a Missouri farmer who is against environmental changes to recognize they could make a lot of money by processing their manure, I have found myself, they change their opinion very rapidly.
Absolutely. And, the reality is that farmers are the original environmentalists. Farmers are natural scientists. They're all the time experimenting. They're leaving certain fields fallow. They're trying different irrigation techniques. They're, trying different. I mean, you think about it of when they embraced Roundup resistant seeds because they could show what the harvest would do to them and how much more money they could make. We're seeing with, some of our large agricultural clients is that they're embracing, action on climate change, not necessarily because they're completely in line with the political winds of the world and everything, but they know that the water and the soil are key to their foundation, but also the key to their profitability. And so by, one of our examples was one of our clients at Sustainable Business Consulting that we work with, that, they started using a really innovative irrigation technique where the plants would get the water exactly when they needed it, as opposed to watering in the morning and the afternoon to fight, evaporation. And they saw their yields go up like crazy. They used less water. They saved tons of money. And they actually then made more money because their yields were bigger. By just talking about yields and money, you could accomplish the exact same thing. You didn't have to convince them about climate change. You didn't have to convince them about the environmental issue. You convinced them of what they cared about.
So let's talk about progress overall. Do you see the parade of generations, just the fact that new kids are growing up with new values, driving a lot of this change? And if in fact that's what is producing most of the progress in terms of cultural awareness of the environment, can we wait for people simply to grow up and be more sustainable, or do we have to make changes now?
We have to make changes now. And, I make the comment all the time when people say to me, well, this next generation and Gen Y and the Millennials and Gen Z, they really get it. And I say, you know what? I remember reading when I was 7 years old about renewable energy and, reducing waste and water and electricity consumption. In 1977, we had an energy crisis, and every light switch in every public building, there was a little sticker that said, please conserve. That's when Toyota and Honda came onto the marketplace in the United States with fuel efficient cars. We had solar panels on the White House back in 1978. We are the generation that needed to wake up and grow up, and we're here. And so the time is now. Also, the amount of time that we have to make the change, we don't have time to wait. We have to make these changes immediately. We only have till 2030 to stop the irreversible effects of climate change. So we need to do it now. And by focusing, I talk about this in both the business and political chapter of our book, by showing people that the profitability, the cost savings, the way to attract new customers and brand value, you can get businesses to turn on a dime if you show it it's in their economic self-interest.
Absolutely.
And so rather than waiting for people to grow up and become kind of aware, people are aware. And one of the things we point out is that it's also not a political divide. It's been put out there that, an issue like climate change is a left-right issue. It's not. The data says it's more of a generational one. In fact, in our book, we go to great lengths. We have several case studies where we show that from ages 18 to 38, actually conservatives believe in climate change more than Democrats. And so we need to break down these mental models, and we need to get to work, but we have to do it in a way that people see it's in their own personal self-interest, and their company's self-interest, as in addition to we need to do it because it's the right thing to do.
So, and then this is a follow-up question. Do you find that, and I know that our readers are interested in this question, do you find that the people on the other side of the environmental discussion, from environmentally aware people, are waking up to climate change due to extreme weather? Are they experiencing these things in the same way that the rest of us are? Wildfire, extreme weather of various sorts. Are they really aware of that?
They definitely are aware of extreme weather, but they're not waking up on whether it's climate change or not. And I think that, again, in the chapter that we have about, on climate advocates versus climate skeptics, we break it down by asking people, and I've done this all over the country, traveled to all 50 states, and, I've asked people, have you been impacted by, an extreme weather event? And everyone has within the last 5 years, whether it's a drought, a flood, a hurricane, whatever it is. And you ask them, like, what is that experience? What did it do to you? Did that stink? And they start telling you about all the inconveniences to life and what happened and how much money they lost and how it impacted their kids. And then you say, do you remember being like this when you were a kid? And to a T, everyone will say, no, it didn't used to be like this. And so you don't have to talk to them about climate. You just say, okay, well, what can we do to mitigate these? What can we do to try and prevent these things from happening and impacting your family? As opposed to saying, now, don't you see that tied to climate change? Because as soon as you do that, then people immediately go back to their talking points and the defensiveness and, whether it's unproven or not. And so I think that's one of the issues that's been struggling with the movement is that, people that believe in climate change, they're always trying to go, aha, see, I gotcha. Let me show you how this is connected. Instead of just leaving it where it is and going, okay, I've got them. They're going to do what they're going to do because it's extreme weather and on that shared moment.
So let's widen the aperture just a little bit and talk about what has happened even since you published the book. And that is 42 million people are out of work. We have had a massive increase in civil unrest as a result of the Black Lives Matter issue, which I believe is absolutely true. They're not treated the same way. You mentioned, when you were pulled over by a cop when you were a kid. If I had been black when I was pulled over by a cop when I was a kid, I would have been in jail. Mm-hmm. That's the very definition of white privilege. It's just the way it is. Now, can we use this collective disruption to start to reorganize our economy to provide equity to lower income people and jobs and opportunity that support a more sustainable economy at this point? And what do you think the ideas that we should be talking about are?
Well, we absolutely have to do that. And, there can be no sustainability or environmental movement unless there's social justice and unless, you have that woven into the fabric. And, for so long, the poorest and the minority communities have been the ones where they've bore the brunt of the kind of environmental damage. It's where the landfills are. That's where the ports are. That's where the airports are. It's where, all the particulate matter from the transportation lines run through there, the rail yards, etc. And there is a unique opportunity as we're talking about racial and social justice, about diversity, equity, inclusion, about people who've been left out of the process and bringing them in. And what I found is there's a zip code in Seattle that's the most diverse zip code in the entire country. And we worked with an organization our company did called the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle. And they did all this outreach to all these minority communities, whether they're Somalis or they were Latino speakers or, from wherever in the world they were. And what we found is that, there's this white privilege mindset of, well, they don't really care about the environment because they're poor. What they care about is X. No, every single one of them wanted their kids to have a better future, to not get sick, to be healthy, to have a better education. And when you start there and you realize, okay, so that's where we are. And these people care just about as much about the environment as, say, white privileged people who, are members of, Greenpeace. It's just that they don't have a voice. They don't have the time or energy to devote to it. They don't have the financial resources to give, or, they're working, but they care about these issues. And they care about the environment, and they certainly want these things cleaned up. No one wants air pollution or asthma or anything for their family or their kids. And so, again, by starting with it as saying, that shared aspiration, we want none of our kids to get sick from air pollution, just as long as you use as an example. And you start with that, then that opens up the conversation to environmental changes and taking action on issues like climate change and bringing it there. But when it's, what are we doing to improve the social and racial inequality and environmental justice for this community in South Seattle, yada, 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 then it gets, the message gets muddled. And so by starting with that shared aspiration, that's really where we need to go. And I think there's this unique opportunity to do that. I think that there has been an awakening, and certainly within the white community, the white progressives who have been willing to kind of, sit on the sidelines, and it hasn't really impacted them. And now you're either in the movement or you're not. And I think that is a very important and powerful thing. And I think it's a necessary step if we're going to have real long-term systemic change.
So let me ask a question about the role of the press, because, of course, Earth911 is a media organization, and we want to help. You point out the fact that hyperpartisan media like MSNBC and Fox News have contributed to the polarity in our society. I actually, and as a career media person, believe that it's the real problem, which they are a symptom of, is that we went to 24/7 news, where you have to be on air filling time. And so instead of simply reporting the facts, we're constantly judging the facts or judging the right or wrong of them or us. How can a media outlet provide facts and both allow people to listen to them and give them a voice in such a way that we can generate the conversation that's going to result in shared understanding, that allyship that you want and recommend rightly that we pursue?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The 24 news cycle and the explosion in social media has, people need to fill time. So it's almost like there's more. Right now, it's like even when sports, for example, there's more shows on there about sports commentary than there are about sports, and it's the same thing with politics and these news shows. But as long as, and we see this with Facebook too, as long as how they are compensated and they're, if it's to their financial benefit to continue to be divisive, they will. I mean, Facebook and Twitter said, we're going to fact check. Facebook said, no, we're not going to fact check because, we found that people want to hear from whichever side they currently believe, and they'll spend more time on our site, and that'll lead to more advertising dollars and helps our bottom line. Mm-hmm. So, and this goes back to the Reagan administration when, they got rid of kind of the requirements about, actual fair reporting. The
fairness doctrine is what it's called.
Exactly. And Dick Cheney was one of the people that helped pass that in the House. Mm-hmm. I really feel like unless something can be done to show that the profit motive or the viewership is going to change, it's kind of impossible to get them away. I mean, both MSNBC and Fox News have regular morning meetings where they see an issue and they go, okay, how can we, make this a more Republican or a more Democratic leaning message, Mm-hmm. And that's problematic. And so, we start the book by saying, because of these, mass siloization where people are only willing to listen to people that agree with them, they only watch shows that they agree with, they only engage with social media with people that agree with, that we have to break that mold. And I feel like the whole point of the book was here are ways to find common ground where instead of trying to convert a Republican to a Democrat, where can you find 5 examples where you could find common ground that can make practical difference in your life and their life? And that's really what we need to do.
Well, I think that's great insight, and it's a good place to stop this conversation, but we'd love to have you back to continue talking about this in greater detail. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks so much. Great to be on today.
Well, folks, that was Kevin Wilhelm, who is the CEO of Sustainable Business Consulting in Seattle. He's also the author of How to Talk to the Other Side, the book we've been discussing. Also, Return on Sustainability, which is a book I bought a few years ago and have completely consumed and written all over. Kevin's books are well worth the time. Check out How to Talk to the Other Side on Kindle. It's available for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. It's $9.95 if you don't have Kindle Unlimited, and there's a paperback edition available as well. So thanks, everyone, for your attention this morning. And this is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we'll be back with another interview soon. Take care, folks.